First contact was supposed to be controlled. The Zelthari High Command had prepared for this day for centuries. Protocols were established, diplomatic strategies refined, and contingencies planned. The arrival of a new species into the galactic community was never left to chance. But then humans happened, and everything fell apart. The unnerving behavior. Ambassador Zalvoth of the Zelthari sat rigidly in his chair, his elongated fingers twitching against the polished obsidian table. Across from him the human delegation sat, staring right at him. He suppressed a shudder. Direct eye contact was a predatory act, an ancient aggression that had no place in diplomatic settings. Even the most warlike species in the galaxy averted their gaze during negotiations. It was a sign of mutual respect. But these humans? They didn't look away. Not once. Unblinking. Focused. Studying. The silence in the chamber was unbearable. It wasn't that humans talked too much. It was that they talked too little. There was no nervous shifting, no fidgeting, no glancing around. They just watched. Zalvoth had never felt so exposed. Is this a psychological tactic? He wondered. Are they trying to establish dominance? Then the lead human, Ambassador Carter, smiled. And Zalvoth nearly recoiled in horror. The smile that changed everything. Baring one's teeth was an act of hostility. It was a signal among nearly every intelligent species in the known universe. Even the most vicious carnivores kept their fangs hidden in polite society. Yet here sat Carter, grinning. Was it a warning? A threat? Some bizarre human ritual? The Zelthari delegation shifted uneasily. They had fought wars against civilizations that had shown them less aggression than this single human's expression. Then Carter spoke. Ambassador Zalvoth, he said, his voice smooth and deliberate, we're looking forward to working with you. And still he held eye contact. Zalvoth's heart pounded in his chest. He had the overwhelming sensation that he was prey, and humanity had just decided to hunt. The meeting ends in panic. By the time the negotiations concluded, Zalvoth could hardly think straight. His mind raced. His instincts screamed at him. As the humans stood and shook hands with one another, he noticed something else. They didn't just make eye contact with him. They made eye contact with everyone. The guards. The attendants. The servants. No hierarchy. No deference. Just unwavering, fearless connection. It was the most alien thing he had ever witnessed. As the humans exited, Zalvoth finally exhaled, his limbs shaking. He turned to his aides. I want everything we have on humans, he ordered. Now. His people had faced galactic tyrants, ancient warlords, and terrifying cosmic horrors. But nothing had ever scared them like this. Zelthari High Command was in chaos. The war room of the Zelthari Grand Council was a place of calculated logic, where cold, meticulous strategy dictated every decision. It was built to handle crises, invasions, and potential extinction-level threats. And yet, at this moment, the most powerful leaders of the Zelthari Empire sat in stunned silence, watching footage of human diplomats, staring. This is unnatural, one of the ministers hissed, his claws tapping anxiously against the table. Even warlords avert their gaze. The only creatures that do this are predators, another finished, their voice tight with unease. Zalvoth sat motionless, his mind swirling. Why do they do it? Even in war there were rules, silent understandings between species. Averted gazes prevented unnecessary bloodshed. It was an instinct woven into the fabric of interstellar civilization. Yet the humans ignored it entirely. And the worst part? It wasn't just their leaders. The humans on the streets. Zelthari intelligence had pulled footage from across the Galactic Embassy's public sectors. Restaurants, streets, meeting halls, even public transport. Everywhere humans walked among other species like they belonged there. They never cowered. They never looked away. They met every glance head-on. There was no submission, no acknowledgement of superiority or rank. Even when confronted by species 4 times their size, humans locked eyes and held their ground. In one particularly disturbing clip, a Vorka mercenary, a towering reptilian brute known for using intimidation as a weapon, loomed over a human trader, expecting the usual response. The human? He simply looked up. No fear. No hesitation. Just that unwavering stare. And then the Vorka backed down. The war room erupted into whispered panic. They know something we don't. Zalvoth turned to his chief intelligence officer, his voice tight. Are they telepathic? The officer hesitated. We've scanned them extensively. No psychic abilities. No pheromones. No biological mind control mechanisms. Zalvatha's claws curled against the armrest of his seat. Then why does every species react to them? The question hung in the air. Finally, a cultural analyst spoke. Sir, I believe it's not what humans are that matters. It's what they believe. The entire room turned toward him. Elaborate, Zalvath commanded. The analyst took a slow breath. They do not acknowledge fear. Not socially. Not physically. Not instinctively. He played another clip, this one from a human military training exercise. The soldiers stood in a perfect line, weapons slung over their shoulders. A commanding officer paced in front of them, shouting, berating them, testing their resolve. Not a single soldier flinched. Not one broke eye contact. The analyst paused the video. They've trained themselves to override natural submission responses. To suppress the primal urge to display weakness. They refuse to be prey. Zalvatha's blood ran cold. This wasn't an intimidation tactic. It was a philosophy. Galactic order begins to fracture. The revelation spread like wildfire. Governments panicked. Psychological studies on human eye contact, confidence, and social dominance became the most sought-after research in the galaxy. Some species viewed humans as gods. Others saw them as a threat to everything civilized. Tensions rose. Treaties wavered. The fragile balance of power that had kept the galaxy in check began to shake. Then, the first assassination attempt happened. And the humans didn't even blink. The assassination attempt that changed everything. The moment the plasma bolt left the assassin's weapon, time seemed to slow. The shot was perfect. A clean angle, direct line of sight, and delivered at point-blank range. Any other diplomat would have collapsed in terror the moment a weapon was drawn on them. Any other species would have flinched, stumbled, or at least reacted. The human? He simply turned his head. The bolt whizzed past his cheek, searing a blackened mark into the wall behind him. The entire room froze. No panic. No scream. No wide-eyed shock. Ambassador Daniel Reyes just turned his gaze to the would-be assassin. And when their eyes met, the real terror began. The Zelthari attacker felt it instantly. Something primal. Something unnatural. The human wasn't afraid. Even as the assassin fumbled for another shot, Reyes stepped forward. No armor. No weapons. No shields. Just those piercing human eyes, locking onto the attacker's soul. And in that moment the assassin broke. Their hand shook. Their second shot went wide, shattering a decorative pillar. Then, against all logic, all reason, the assassin ran. Not because they feared retaliation. Not because of any visible threat. But because they could not bear to be looked at. The entire galactic embassy descended into chaos. The aftermath, unspoken power. For the next 72 hours, the Zelthari High Council scrambled to contain the situation. The assassin was never caught, not because they had vanished, but because they had surrendered themselves to the nearest security force, trembling, unable to explain why. But the damage was done. The footage spread across the galactic network, reaching millions in a matter of hours. And the consequences were immediate. Every species, every government, every military force suddenly realized something horrifying. Humans had no fear. Not in the way other species understood it. Not in the way civilizations had been built upon. The unspoken truth of galactic power. Interstellar diplomacy had always relied on an unspoken rule. Fear maintains order. The strongest empires thrive because they could impose fear upon lesser species. But what happens when fear stops working? What happens when an empire built on intimidation encounters a species that simply refuses to acknowledge it? The fracture begins. The first empire to break away from the galactic concordance was the Javarkai Dominion, a race of towering insectoid warriors. Their warlord made one simple statement. We do not negotiate with creatures who cannot be cowed. Within days, the Vorka clans followed suit. Soon after, so did the Xyrix Collective, the Tarnathi Federation, and countless others. The galactic balance was shattering. Because if humans couldn't be controlled, then what was the point of the fragile peace? Humans begin their first war. The Zelthari, desperate to keep order, called for a full diplomatic summit. They pleaded with the humans, urging them to understand the damage they had caused. Reyes' response was chilling. He simply smiled. Then he said something that sent a shockwave through the galaxy. We did nothing. You're the ones who built your power on fear. Maybe it's time you learned a different way. And just like that, war became inevitable. The Javarkai declared humanity a galactic threat. They sent their war fleets, their elite assassins, their best warriors, all to subjugate a species that refused to kneel. They expected humanity to break. Instead, they learned the final, terrifying truth. Humans didn't just refuse to fear. They made others afraid. The Battle of Kari Prime. The Javakai thought they understood war. They had crushed planetary uprisings with ease, sent entire species into submission with orbital bombardments, and broken civilizations before they even realized they were at war. Against humans? None of that worked. The first assault on Kari Prime, a human-held colony world, should have been an easy victory. It wasn't. The moment the Javakai fleet arrived, they sent their standard transmission. Surrender and be spared. What they received in return was silence. Then the humans sent one message back. Come and see. The invasion becomes a massacre, but not for humans. The Javakai landed their best warriors on the surface, expecting a slaughter. They got one. Just not the one they expected. Their forces were met with silence. No screaming civilians, no terrified troops, no frantic diplomats begging for mercy. Just humans. Watching. Waiting. Then the first shots were fired. And that's when the Javakai learned what it meant to fight something that does not fear you. They had been conditioned to crush resistance through intimidation. But humans? They fought with a different kind of madness. They didn't hesitate. They didn't retreat. They didn't break rank. They just kept advancing. And they never stopped staring. Even when they were shot. Even when they were bleeding out. Even when they should have collapsed, they still looked their enemies in the eyes. And the Javakai broke. They turned and ran, their battle doctrine shattered, because they had no contingency for an enemy that didn't flinch. The first fleet falls. The retreat should have been simple. The Javakai fleet had superior firepower, superior numbers. By all logic, they should have been able to fall back in order. But humans did not fight with logic. Their ships didn't just chase. They hunted. A standard military force would have fired their weapons at a safe distance, used tactics, maintained control. Humanity? They closed the gap. They forced the Javakai ships into face-to-face combat, their own warships running insanely close to the enemy hulls, their weapons firing from such an aggressive distance that escape became impossible. The battle wasn't just a defeat. It was a humiliation. The final transmission. When the last Javakai warlord stood on his crumbling bridge, he did something no one expected. He sent a final transmission, not to his own people. To humanity. What are you? The response was simple. Daniel Reyes himself sent it. His face appeared on the warlord's screen. Come. Unshaken. Eyes locked forward. And all he said was, still here. Then the final Javakai flagship exploded. The moment the galaxy looked away. After Kari Prime, the galactic order collapsed. Empires withdrew their fleets from human space. Armadas vanished from the front lines. Diplomats stopped making demands. Because they had seen the truth. There was no point in fighting a species that could not be intimidated. No reason to start wars against a force that would never look away first. Humanity had won without needing to conquer. They had broken the galaxy without firing the first shot. All they had done, all they ever needed to do, was look. Fire the galaxy is afraid to meet their eyes. What happens next? I subscribe now because the war might be over, but the humans are just getting started.